Hello, we're live, yeah. We're currently missing Royal Oak because he's failed at cooking apparently. You know. Uh, this stream will be on economics on the right, like the title says, and we have some little directions to take this conversation slash debate. Well, it's not going to really be a debate. It's just a little talk with you, the lads. Let's introduce everyone here. You can go first, Napster.
My name is Napster. That's what I go by. Uh, I run a pretty shit channel. Yeah, donate a sub. And today I'll be representing the classical liberal, libertarian, laissez-faire position.
We'll go to Big Dave now.
Hello, I am Dave. I I run a YouTube channel which there's only video as a rugby commentary video up until now. I shall be representing a corporatist viewpoint based on the ideals of autarky and the organisation of the nation's businesses into national corporations.
Okay. Now the strawberry guy. Last but not least.
Hello there, I'm that strawberry guy. I have one video on my channel, which I haven't done anything with in a while, but that might change. I'm basically here to represent the position that there are two forms of economic thought within the right, or two strands of thought within the right, of which laissez-faire free market capitalism is one. I am not here particularly to represent one or the other position with regards to right-wing economics, but there are, I think I've got a fair bit of knowledge to contribute, so I hope we can get to that.
Yeah, when O comes on, he'll introduce himself. Mr. 1K. Okay. Firstly, let's discuss what is in particular what makes a something right wing. Let's discuss that first. We'll go with that strawberry guy.
Something that's right wing, it's something that people look at from the political compass angle quite a lot, and they say it's an economic position purely. I have been introduced to a different way of understanding things, which demonstrates that essentially the right wing is anything that is not communitarianism in the sort of sense that people would refer to it as communism. So there are two positions on the right that I believe I've identified. You have the absolutist position and the more individualist position, and they are right wing because they are not communitarianism. Essentially, that's where I stand on
it. Dave.
Well, my opinion on the subject is that, in essence, something right-wing in the terms of economics is simply based upon a rejection of the automatic equality of people, as can be seen in economic ideals of things like such as capitalism and corporatism and other such ideals. If you look at the left-wing ideals in both an economic and social sense, everything you see is based upon an automatic assumption that everyone is born equal and is equal throughout life in a basic form. Now, this leads to things such as the state trying to, of course, enforce equality, whereas in the right-wing sphere of the economics, you see sort of the aspects of inequality not being sort of treated as such, as it's seen as not a bad thing, and sort of the economic system in essence creates varying degrees of inequality among individuals in a society.
And Napster.
So, first off, I just like to say that the word right wing is so vague that it doesn't really mean anything. But I guess if it means conservatism, it just means preserving the values or the way of life of a certain, preserving the way of life. So if your country is already capitalist, then the right wing of that country will be capitalist economics. That's the way I see it.
All right. How I can agree with Napster there about the rights and how it's meant to preserve all that. However, I think, like I mentioned in my stream beforehand of this on distributism and what the right stands for, the axiom of traditionalism, which should be the forefront of the right, is community. It is family and it's faith, and all those should be derived from the particular bundles of values of that. And I don't particularly see so I'm probably going to discuss here de jure and de facto right wing economics. So in a de jure sense, it particularly should be favoring one's community and favoring the nation as a whole, rather than, let's say, free market, free trade, free that capitalist nonsense. But in de facto sense, right now, right wing economics is more commonly seen as laissez-faire capitalist economics, whether we like it or not. It's due to the socio-political history of the West. That's the reason why it's currently capitalistic laissez-faire. Uh, okay, let's now discuss the objectives of the right. Let's start with Big Dave.
The objectives. So, in what manner would you mean
The objectives. So, what is the right trying? What is the right?
So the
traditionalism.
end goal, would you say?
The end goal. What is the end goal,
Alright,
and what
cool.
are we trying to perceive?
So from my well, in my opinion, what should be the end goal from my particular position is the establishment of a total corporatist state in which, sure, the free endeavour of business is allowed, but
Dave, I think we'll touch on that. We'll touch on that. We'll touch on that after we talk about this. But I think what I wanted to talk about is more on the right, or more on the movement scale.
Well, that's a very broad scale, in my opinion. So it's hard to classify into a singular thing. But overall, I think what's trying to be worked towards is a system based on the free endeavour of the individual on the lowest level. Now, on the upper levels, it gets the difference between certain positions, of course, handling a big business and incorporation into the state. But I think on the lowest level, what's being strived towards is a system in which the small man, the man at the bottom, has has economic freedom to purchase what he wishes and whatever amount in the country, and to, if he wishes to do so, set up a business which he wants to do. Whereas that's certainly not the case in left-wing economics.
Yeah, I could agree with that. We'll go with Napster now. What is the end goal of the right-wing movement?
So, as I have already said, the word right wing is so vague as to make it meaningless, but if I go by my previous statement, I guess to preserve whatever is already in place and to stray from reform, from at least left-wing reform.
And finally, we'll go to that strawberry guy.
So on the goals of the right, I don't think I really disagree with Big Dave a lot. The only thing I would have to add is that the goals of the right are essentially, well, they have to essentially be a combination of absolutism and individualism, as I've mentioned, are the two polars of the right, which contrast with one another, but can be synergized together insofar as you have an absolutist system which preserves the right of private ownership and appropriately protects free enterprise and allows that to flourish. And that would be where the individualism side of things comes into it. So that is essentially the aim of the right, is to preserve a culture which, well, not even preserve a culture necessarily, just conserve those two things which allow individualism to flourish and helps maintain a, shall we say, quasi-absolutist state.
I'll touch on individualism later, but I'll let in Rolloak now, the big man himself.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry I'm late. I had a very nice dinner. It was pretty tasty.
Nice. Okay, introduce yourself, big man.
All right. I'm Royal Oak. I make some YouTube videos sometimes, tweet quite a lot, probably too much. Generally speaking, I'd say I'm a paleo conservative in terms of my political views. And I think the question specifically on economics is, are we talking about what's the aim of the right at the moment?
Yeah, we are currently. What's the aim of the right? Then we'll link that with economics and finance.
In my view, I suppose this is a more communitarian view, but I'd say that the aim of the right is a foundation of a community with common morality and common laws and common culture, under which there can be sort of a high trust community, in which people can survive and thrive, sort of like like an English town or perhaps an English village. I'd say the goal of the right is the foundation and maintenance of a moral community with common morality. Yeah,
that's a fair opinion. Now let's go on to how we've already discussed what we perceived as the objectives for the right, and what's most common here. What I've heard is that to conserve that said either culture or whatever's there, and the one main thing I've heard is ownership. How do you feel? In what sense should ownership be extended to? We'll start with that strawberry guy, as he was talking about it quite a lot.
Pardon me, sorry, could you rephrase the question? I didn't quite understand that.
Oh, so it was emphasized a lot that ownership was the ownership and conserving that was one of the main priorities of the right-wing movement, linking it with economics. So how far should we extend the right to private property?
Well, this is the right to private property must be absolutely enforced. But the thing about free enterprise, which I may disagree with Napster on, is that it does not necessarily conserve anything. Anything can be made a commodity, whether it's your table, your house, or your culture. Anything can be made to sell something. So if you want to take the purely absolutist strain of the right, then you will be conserving the culture at the expense of free enterprise. And if you want to take a balanced view, if you want to take the opposite view, let's say, the culture isn't that great unless it can make you money. That's unconstrained free enterprise. That's why I keep going back to the two poles of the absolutist right and the individualist right. So to conserve something is not to introduce a purely individualist system into it. To conserve something, you have to have a necessary evil, shall we say, a leviathan, a state, dare I say, to make sure that it's more than just private property that you're looking after. And in fact, private property may not even be it may come under, what's the name of the term with the state? I've forgotten the term, but essentially the state capture of property may come about if you wish to conserve everything as it is.
Will Napster, as that strawberry guy quite called you out on that, would you? Are you going to respond to that?
Sure. So what you're saying is if it is too individualist, it can lead to the possibility of commodification of the culture. So how do I respond to that? So first off, I don't necessarily think you're that wrong, but I would like to say that when you mean by commodification, there is always see, you can't commodify something if there is no demand for it. See, so with capitalism, if you only want to make money, you have to look at what is needed by the people. So actually, uh, if commodification of the culture occurs, it is because the people allow it to.
Does that strawberry guy want to respond to that, or
Yeah, I
shall
mean, I
we
can kind of,
continue on?
I can agree with that. I would just add that to me, there's no cultural artifact that exists, or any kind of cultural artifact that exists that could not be sold, because cultural artifacts within a culture tend to have value ascribed to them. So if they didn't, they'd be thrown away. Anything that is cultural is there for a reason. Therefore, I would say, with perhaps a handful of exceptions, that any kind of cultural, I'm not just talking about a physical object, by the way. It could be something that could be made into a brand, like religious gods or what have you, deities. It could be iconography, it could be art, whatever it is. If it's a cultural artifact, it's valued by the cultural context in which it's in, which it is found in, rather, and can be commodified and sold.
Okay, so what do you actually mean by the commodification of culture?
Taking something as value by a culture and making money off of it, essentially.
Like, for example, what?
Well, I mean, you could argue anything in a museum is essentially being commodified if people are walking around it and have to pay to see it. That would be a bit of an extreme example. Something simpler would be taking the quill of Shakespeare, let's say, from his office and selling that on eBay for however many squillions of pounds you wish to. Do you see what I mean? There are multiple avenues of doing it. So long as there's someone making money off of it, I would say there's commodification involved there.
Thought on Lewis's comment: supply and demand would not be the reason why a cultural artifact becomes a commodifier. Any comments?
Well, to an extent, I mean, at the moment, like, I don't think it can be said that, especially, when we're talking about things like cultural artifacts and things like that, I don't think there is a total free market, because there's often the argument used that, there's a lot of regulation surrounding. I mean, it's quite a specific sector, and I'm not absolutely an expert in it, but you can't just like buy something that's extremely historically important without having the prerequisites that you can conserve it to an extent. Like, you can't just go out and buy an Egyptian tomb. Like, you have to, have the suitable prerequisites in order to be able to conserve it. So is it being, I suppose to an extent it's being commodified, but it's being commodified in the sense of there's still, obviously it's to an extent still being sold, but there's still, sort of like a government. Obviously the government is sort of, you could say, a wider community. The government is creating, sometimes, they create organizations like English Heritage, or the National Trust, which are to an extent connected to the state. And those organizations are usually the ones that run those kind of things. So it doesn't really exist in a free market environment. So I'm not sure if you perhaps you could say it's being commodified. I'm not enough of an expert on this particular sector, but yeah, a lot of art does get purchased. I'm talking more about like stuff like that. You couldn't just buy the Rosetta Stone, or you couldn't just buy the Benin bronzes, or you couldn't just buy
The railways.
yeah, you couldn't. Well, yeah, that's not. That's kind of a different sector, but yeah. But what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't exist in a free market environment. So I'm not sure if you can say that it's being commodified. But yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Oh, Big Dave.
I mean, personally, I agree with the point of Lewis, is that culture artifacts are not commodities because of supply and demand in the sense of a market. They're commodified purely because of the will of the common masses, the will of the common masses to preserve and view these cultural artifacts. I mean, a museum doesn't preserve an Egyptian sarcophagus, for example, because of the profit of preserving it and letting people view it. They preserve the sarcophagus out of a common duty of historical preservation, and because it's widely known that people would wish to see these items preserved. Hence the preservation, and hence these items become commodified, not because of altruistic and nonsensical demands of supply and such forth.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, fair. Well, that was loud. On the topic of supply and demand, one thing which is popped off recently is, well, from my inbox, reading some Goldman Sachs article, is that let me just link it. It talks about how the free market is the essence of traditionalism. Now, whether you agree or not, there's an important part in that where it mentions. Wait, let me just get up for you, lads. I think it'll be better if I just show it rather than me just explaining it. Does anyone else have anything to say? If you don't go off topic.
One thing I'd like to do is make a point on the previous subject of how much the extent of ownership should extend to.
Big Dave, yeah. No, we'll talk about ownership then.
Yeah, so it's my personal opinion that in the terms of the individual's right to ownership, it should be practically unrestricted as long as it doesn't go contrary to the interest of the state. It could even extend to ownership of other individuals if they should so wish. But the way ownership, in my opinion, should be severely limited in the field of businesses owning aspects of the country, and businesses that would allow businesses to exert influence over a state and to its ill will, and to act contrary to the will of the state. So it's my personal opinion that the ownership of things, of businesses, should be practically non-existent, and the absolute incorporation of businesses over a certain sort of level, a certain size, if you will, into the state itself is necessary for problems like that to be avoided. So ownership to a certain level should be restricted for organizations, but unrestricted for individuals for this precise reason.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a question of where you draw the line, because as it is already, there's B Sky B, I think B Sky B, and I think who did B Sky B want to combine with? I can't remember. It was a while back, but they wanted. I think it was a merger with Fox, possibly, but they weren't allowed to do it because it would mean that there would be too much of a monopoly. So to an extent, those kind of rules already exist. I suppose the question is like where you would draw the line. Like, would you let a corner store own, like, say, 5 branches, maybe 10 branches? Would you stop at 10 branches, or?
I'll probably stop it at a single-digit number before it has to be incorporated in some form into a guild or state institution to sort of control it, so it doesn't act contrary to the state's will, if you will, and disadvantage the country.
I suppose the issue with that I would have, obviously, I'm opposed to monopolies and oligopolies forming. That's, a very negative thing for consumers. But I think to an extent you do get things like economies of scale and things like that, where it becomes more efficient for a business to say, own a branch in every city, because then they got the supply chain networks, they can get prices down for consumers. But again, there's also the argument of sort of local stores being allowed to survive and thrive. Excuse me. I'd say perhaps like you could do grants for like single store like companies that you didn't give to those bigger companies, but obviously you still got the economies of scale in there, just so there's a level playing field. To that, I wouldn't like physically stop businesses growing past 9 branches.
I'm not talking about sort of physically stopping them growing, but I'm saying if they wish to grow past a certain point, they have to be incorporated in some manner into a state institution for the regulation of actions of businesses, if you will, like a
Okay.
guild of corporations, like has been established in places such as Spain in the under Franco and Italy under Mussolini.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of the guild system myself, but I'll let someone else speak now.
Fair enough. Does anyone else want to comment on private ownership? No one? All right. Let me move the topic forward then. I won't touch on the Goldman Sachs thing because I can't find the link for it, the article. Now I think one thing I wanted to touch on was that was on the idea of individualism and how that plays into the economies, especially right-wing economies. Do you? Okay, I think this is one for everyone here. Is it better that if we were in a community that we should prioritize the individual or the collective? And that doesn't mean through a left-wing scale, like, oh, for the workers. It could necessarily be for the collective, for a family, or said that local area region. So we'll go with Oak first then.
Well, I'd just say this kind of links back, and this is a sort of key trend running through, and any discussion of the right and economics is it again goes back to the sort of Cold War and the times of the 70s and 80s around when obviously over here in the UK you had a very, very ineffectual social democratic government. You can go back to 1979 and think about the graves, the dead were waiting to be buried. The bin on one strike and stuff like that because of 2 powerful unions, and obviously there's all the social democratic stuff. And then you obviously get Thatcher in. Similar thing was sort of happening with the US and Reagan. And I think you kind of had a link possibly between. I think it's fair to say that Thatcher and Reagan were social conservatives. Perhaps people here wouldn't describe them as much as social conservatives, but perhaps what they did was, I think it's called fusionism, the kind of view that they had. They linked that sort of social conservatism with sort of like libertarian economics, Hayek, Rothbard, people like that, Mises. You sort of had those two linked together, and the reason for that was very, very specific. Because you had the USSR at the time, and we were in a battle with the USSR, and obviously in the end, perhaps this might be a controversial statement for some people on the stream, but it looks to me like perhaps the pro market view won in 1989, to an extent, not necessarily a capitalist view, but a pro market view. So it seems like in individualism and sort of pro market and sort of like pro capital, that view won the day, it seems. But obviously, that ended in 1991, right? It's time, perhaps to rethink that economic view. It's not the Cold War anymore. So I'd say when it came to a community, what we're having is a big in society, we have a big problem of atomization, where people feel disconnected from the community, and that's partially because of this sort of individualist strain that has run through society. You can go through all the stats on that, but I'd say you still, I don't think you're going to be able to get past, when you're talking about economics, you won't be able to get past the concept of markets. Markets, I think, is an inevitable thing. I think as humans, we are, as humans, we're sort of like creatures that will barter and trade. That's part of our, I don't know, natural way of being. I think you're never going to get past the point where you don't have markets. I think that will always exist, but there still needs to be more of a focus on the collective. So perhaps something like distributism. Probably, I'd say the best view in terms of economics for the right. Again, I'm not an economist myself. I don't know an awful lot about sort of the economy, but perhaps sort of a more Trumpian view, a kind of protectionist to an extent, but also sort of pro-free market, pro-worker, pro-family policies. Those are sort of the best for bringing together a community. Is probably the best thing. What's young Mitch said? Let's see. Thatcher, people around her were socially conservatives, but she focused too much on economics and foreign policy. Section 28 was good, but you don't have, say, a scrutinite takeover like Long March, possibly. Thatcher, I think Thatcher was too focused on. Thatcher believed very, very heavily in ideas rather than like physical concepts. So there's a sort of what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not dimorphous, but the sort of a contrast between the sort of Powellite and the Thatcherite view. Powell was more focused on perhaps institutions or physical things that existed. I think Thatcher was very, very focused on ideas. She believed very strongly in ideas like freedom and liberty, and she believed throughout her life that that's what Britain meant, and that's what all those things. And I think there was actually a conversation that she had with Enoch Powell where he said oh well, I care about England and anyway despite these values, and she couldn't I think he said she couldn't understand the concept of Britain outside the concept of freedom or liberty. But I think to an extent I think those kind of values are well intentioned, especially mixed with social conservatism. I think generally speaking that might be a controversial statement, but I don't think that liberty liberty is a bad thing. I think liberty, as long as it's not infringing upon the rights of others, I think, as Dave said, I think generally speaking, people should be allowed to, do what they want to an extent. Those are kind of ideas that obviously came out of the civilizational tests we had in the past. But where was I going? I forgot. It's more of a focus on the physical things that exist than values, I'd say, and a more collectivist and nationalist perhaps view, or communitarian. My voice is running out. Someone else speak.
Yeah, I'll probably take it to Big Dave because I know he's got strong
all right.
opinions on Thatcher.
So, in my opinion, in relation to this discussion on things such as communitarianism and the free market, my simple concern is that my opinion is that these two aspects, the free market and individualism in society, they're a cancer. They need to be eliminated. Free market and individual thought, not individual thought, but individual identity as being not part of a community, eliminated entirely in our society if we are to survive.
Yeah.
If we continue along this path of atomization resulting from the policies of the free market in many cases, then what's going to be left of the country in a few decades' time? Nothing. It's going to be ashes, or a husk of what it formerly was, even more so than what it is currently. I mean, what needs to be done in this sense is a communitarian approach in all matters, in rights, in the education system, in everything in our society. We need to prioritize community above everything, not the individual liberties of people, which are not individual human rights, which I believe are a bunch of nonsense anyway. The only way that we can survive as a people is by prioritizing the community in this nation.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, I agree with
Just
that.
to
definitely.
interject, however, what about individuals who just don't want to be part of their community? Are we going to force people to get along in their community
If
and
they
to the ends of the earth, or
if
how
they
far
don't
are we
want
going
to
to take that?
if they don't want to be part of the national community or the local community, why should they be allowed into the national community as a whole?
What
If
if
they
they're
want
already
to,
there?
if
I
they're
mean,
already
as
there,
we've already said, there is a trend that's been going on for however long you wish to say it, of social atomization. There's a whole generation at the very least that are used to that and that
Oh,
just know it as a default. They may be completely alien to the idea,
Well-
let alone the actual actions involved of being part of the
well,
community.
I'd say the way to fix that is, depending on the individual circumstance of the person, they should either be forced into a community way of living, or be excluded from the national community as a whole, deported, if you will. Obviously, depending on the characteristics of the individual, that would fix the problem, in my opinion.
Well, I think I'd like to give an answer as well. I think it would be very, very hard to find someone, unless this was like a really, really sad person, that's not a part of a community, like a part of a sort of wider group. So to say like, what if people opt out? I know it's sort of an idea from the Enlightenment to an extent, although Hobbes being called a liberal is a bit shaky. But the social contract, I think, is a good idea. I think. The idea that citizens give up sections of their liberty in exchange for security is at its core a very, very good idea, and I think people should, to an extent, have a right to opt out of that. Obviously, in the past, we had stuff like the commons where people could go live, and like free land. Obviously, that was, I can't remember the word. I think what's the word? Fenced off. Someone else probably knows, but it was cornered off and given out as private property. But I think there should be an option for people to opt out if they don't want to, be a part of the national community or, a community generally. But
I see.
I think most people, I think the I'd say like 99% of people wouldn't opt out. But yeah.
To interject, I just want to
or...
interject quickly. I agree with Duke's sentiment here. There's nothing to be forced. It's more or less. It's just more cultural thing. You were there because it was the right thing to do morally. So it's a bit like distributism. There's no government schemes. It's not big. It's what Hilaire Belloc calls the mood and the sentiment. So. With Duke, I definitely agree with that. Big lad, you can go. You can go now.
So, in my opinion, people just being able to opt out is sort of unacceptable in total. Another saying, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. If we are to...
I'm not sure if I agree. Right, sorry, I'll let you. Sorry, that was very rude. I apologise.
That's fine. So if we are to sort of preserve ourselves and sort of head forwards and become a world power once again, and sort of defend ourselves against world countries such as China, it may not be a very libertarian or free or even social or even a sort of approach seemed acceptable by today's liberal values, but I think that's what needs to be done in order to save the country and save the British people from the domination by countries such as China, who would do us ill.
Again, it comes back to this. There is a generation of British people that have, yes, as Oak has highlighted, some sense of community one way or the other, but the other way is that it's not tied to Britain. They play video games online. They always have. They've made friends online. They always have. They've been on chat rooms after chat rooms after chat rooms, and they're part of a community. It's just not local to them. It still means something to them. And it's all they know how to do. They wouldn't even know the first place where to begin. And my question to you is and possibly Oak as well, is when we talk about opt-in, opt-out, what does that entail? Is it a quota? Do people have to fill out forms every week noting the KPIs of the key performance indicators of community participation that they've completed for that week? How do we assess how this is going?
Well, I wouldn't even say it would necessarily have to be a formal thing. I think to an extent, perhaps like people like you know, picking up sticks and, you know, perhaps moving to a rural area, moving to the woods, or, you know, going to live in like a van or something. You could say that that's opting out of society to an extent. It doesn't necessarily need to be a sort of formalized process. I think it would be quite difficult, I think, even in our modern age, to find someone that doesn't like have some sense of local community where they live. Perhaps, you know, people obviously moving around and things like that for jobs, that could potentially happen, but I wouldn't say that's a large number of people. And again, I think it would be unlikely that you would have more than a couple % of people opting in and opting out. And going back to sort of Big Dave's point, I think Duke said it very much better than I could in the chat. He said that the basis of community, the basis of community was neighborhoods, the church, and local social groups. It was not forced, and forcing it will not work, in my humble opinion. And I think I sort of have to agree with that. I don't think you can force identity on someone. I think to an extent, that's what perhaps, you know, some sort of civic nationalists sort of do. You go, one Britain, great nation. Anyone remember that? But I'm not sure. Like, generally, this is a sort of a separate point. I'm not sure if I agree with everything inside the state, everything outside the state, because you have to leave some room for other things. But you know, perhaps that's a discussion for another day. But I think it'd be very, very unlikely you'd have more than 1 or 2% of people are just opting out of society completely. And I think you'll always have those kind of sort of outcast figures, but I don't think you'll ever be able to get rid of that. But I don't know. I think if there was a collectivization that happened, I think most people would opt in. But yeah, as Lewis said, if you didn't go to church, you were fucked off. Indeed, it's not the case anymore. Not the case anymore. Very sadly.
Sadly, yeah. Napster, do you want to say anything regarding to any of the topics we've stated?
Yeah, so I wasn't saying anything because it was just too interesting.
Fair enough.
So, no, we talk about atomization, yet we're all strangers on the internet. So I guess we need community in a pragmatic sense, but if we're talking, in my opinion, because I'm actually a individualist, I'm spending my time talking with strangers instead of with my neighbors. I think that the individual should be the main point of life instead of the community, which I guess separates us.
Well, I perhaps might disagree with Big Dave a little bit. I don't think you can be either an absolute individualist or an absolute collectivist. I think, you know,
It's a fusion mix, yeah.
Yeah, I think everyone is to an extent individualist and to an extent collectivist. I suppose that's the only thing I'd say. I imagine someone else has probably got some points on this.
Well, I mean, the point that I was intending to make was sort of nothing against the state, everything in the state. Well, it wasn't making the point that you can either be an absolute individualist or an absolute collectivist. I'm making the point that individualism in itself shouldn't exist. Individualism is extremely harmful, and it can be seen as something that's caused nearly all the harm in our society in the past good deal of decades, if you catch my drift. So I'm saying is that overall that this aspect of our society should be eradicated by force if necessary, for the better good of everyone.
So, might I say, in my opinion, communitarianism, or the community, has been far more harmful than the individual. An individual cannot commit genocide. Only a community can commit genocide. So.
What?
Okay, all right. So what do you mean? The community is much more harmful than
a community can force people to do immoral things for the sake of the community.
The only thing I'd say to that is there's no such thing as a community decision. Like you can't like collectively. It would be physically impossible. Even the Catholic Church, which is obviously Limbu is a member of, there's 1 billion people in it, but every decision that's made is a decision of one person, and then there's obviously an agreement on it. There's no such thing as a collective decision. Everything, to an extent, comes from an individual.
I meant like mob mentality.
Yeah,
mob men.
yeah. Well, I mean,
I
But
could
who do
see
you
where.
sue in a case of mob mentality? Is what Oak's getting at. Like, if a riot breaks out, right? You're dealing with 100 cases of property damage, not one mob case of property damage all over a certain area.
I'm saying the mob can influence individuals to do things they wouldn't otherwise do.
Is that necessarily a bad thing, though? That's the question. I mean, in a good deal of cases,
It can be good, it can be bad. So.
yeah, in a good deal of cases where this has occurred, in my opinion, this has been a good thing. I mean, so surely there are certain instances where it's been a bad thing to do. Obviously, in cases of riots, which has been participation has been due to community pressures, like as we see in 2011 and aspects like that. But overall, I'd say about 90% of the time, the pressure of communal of the community is bound to sort of pressure into good things and good actions.
Especially if you want to account in what we're looking at, especially through a right perspective, through the right-wing axiom of faith and family. You wouldn't see a mob mentality of people doing, cretinous actions, especially if the main part of that was faith and preserving and helping families. So,
Exactly. So community values could prevent situations like that entirely. Because I mean, events like that are usually caused by things such as atomization and a lack of communal responsibility and punishment, which emboldens people to do that. In a communal form of living, that simply wouldn't happen.
I just want to address a bit of an elephant in the room, which Oak brought up earlier, which, when I believe you referred to the 1979 situation with regards to the Cold War. Conflict against the common enemy inspires pressure within the community because the community is under pressure. So to me, I don't really see a much stronger catalyst for that other than war. I'm not asking a question. I'm just leaving that for anyone else to pick up of if they have any threads to go with that.
Well, possibly. I want to sort of, without meaning to dogpile Napster too much, which I'm concerned maybe happening, but I'd say that it's a fundamental denial of human nature. I'd say, sort of, to an extent, an extremely individualist view would be a denial of human nature, because humans by nature are social creatures. You know, we were born with voice boxes, with brains, and we can speak. We've developed languages, and you can go back to the sort of Tower of Babel and things like that. I think to say that humans shouldn't be in a community is a fundamental denial. I mean, even you can look at apes. Like, apes are in a community. Humans should be in a community. That's how we are. We're social animals, and denying that makes people miserable. Frankly, sort of denying people their community. What was it say? TSG, you said you think only war has the capability of collectivizing people.
I have had these discussions before, but in the context in which we're having now, the only thing I've heard that invites community pressure is war. The only thing that creates within a community the pressure which binds people together is war. That's all I've heard. That's all that I've heard from the panel, because I'm trying to figure out, right, where exactly community pressure comes from like other people. Because if there's no such thing as a collective decision, the community can't just really decide one day, oh, we're going to pressure each other to really come together. It doesn't strike me as a very spontaneous thing to happen.
I wouldn't go as far as to say war was the only thing. I think it could perhaps be true to say that struggle could be, perhaps, in a lot of cases, the only thing. Obviously, struggle is relative, extremely, so it's a very broad statement. But I'd say, like, my mind goes to Boscastle in Cornwall, where there's been sort of flooding over the times, and that community, like, you can give examples of communities coming together during, like, those kind of struggles and those kind of things being the things that can build back up the community. Obviously, we don't want to see people, in bad situations, but I think those are the kind of things that can bring a community together. I think you're right. I wouldn't go as far as to saying war was the only thing, but I think it's true to say that struggle is something.
But yeah, struggle definitely is the only things which can be used to unify a community especially in the times that we're in.
So
If
might
I
I
may use
say,
if I use a sort of a historical example of this, so in Weimar Germany, it was a very atomized society before 1933. How was the society reorganized into a unified society by the beginning of the war? This was due to struggle. Now, whether I'm not saying I don't approve of the form of struggle which was initiated, but sort of the struggle against a group and the struggle as as a people to rebuild, which was being initiated by the government at the time, where not done they used authoritarian means to do so, but they did it nonetheless, is one of the only methods of sort of unifying a society which has been atomized to a great extent, in my opinion.
Yeah, Napster, you can reply or you can say something.
Strawberry,
so
that's hilarious. Sorry, carry on.
so I would say that struggle is of course one unifying factor, but another thing is just general cooperation. So if you look at the most community-based societies in the world, you find that they are almost always like irrigation societies, because they need a lot of cooperation for their society to function much more than say a herder-based society. You see in China, where China is one of the most community-based society. You can look at Confucian philosophy, which is very community-based. So I disagree that struggle is the only thing that unites society.
Well, firstly, the communists in China destroyed all the statues of Confucius. I wouldn't say China was necessarily Confucian society. But
Before communism.
well, I think back, if you went back to Confucius, which was thousands of years ago, probably you'd have to go back to the reasons humans collectivized to begin with, which I think archaeologists seem to mostly agree was collectivized agriculture. When there was a necessity to plant grain and pick up all the grain and things like that. The collectivization was necessary, and again, why was it necessary? Because there was a big struggle at the time, a struggle to survive. That's as close as you can get to the state of nature back then, or just post state of nature perhaps. But
I guess not struggle, but war is not the only way.
no, I agree. I think it's struggle is the only way that a community can collectivize.
But
Well,
not necessarily war.
If we're going down the path of, hate to interrupt, if we're going down the path of struggle throughout our evolutionary history, agriculture was almost certainly not the first time we faced struggle and had to come together to survive. It was if we go back to a time you used earlier, it was kind of an economy of scale when it comes to food, because you're able to produce more. I would probably venture more efficiently. But if you're an individual out in the world, okay, it's not Minecraft. You can't just wander around and hoard all the resources you need, whilst in terms of food, water, and shelter, and at the same time warm your house and cook your food in such a manner that you can actually digest it to get the amount of nutrients you would need to live that lifestyle. You would need a division of labor between, first of all, your companions, then your family, then your community. That is how it would work. You would travel. I can't remember I think it's the term is a party band society, we were a party band society from the get-go. We would travel around in party bands,
Confucius
divide
time.
the labor between us. Eventually, we would have families, and you can fast forward to Confucius. Sorry, it was just a little niggle on the agricultural bit.
Yeah, obviously, you can think about bonobos or orangutans that sort of exist in those kind of extended family structures. You could say that's to an extent a community, couldn't you? So
I don't know. Bonobos are very atomized. Bonobos are seriously atomized.
are they right? Wrong. Orangutans.
They really are.
or
Yeah,
apes
no,
or
we'll go
monkeys,
with
there
just
you go.
chimps. Yeah, chimps, standard chimps, or as Iron Duke says, hunter-gatherers.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about economic stability and strength. From what I've gathered from most of the panel tonight, is that the way forward is through a community-based economic system, while favoring as well, still keeping the market system, if you could say so. So how would what economic system, or what system forward would help the stability of the economy, so safety for its needs and wants, and how people would do with those things, and strength, does that economic system, or does that economy help us to defend our nation in times when downturn happens?
So if I speak first,
Yeah, you can go first. We'll go.
so in my opinion, apparently one of the only ways to ensure stability in the current system of the world we have is to establish a system in which a corporatist system based on autarky. We need to be completely self-reliant. Complete self-reliance is what we should strive for utter national stability. Otherwise, we're going to be influenced terribly by the instability in nations in which we acquire goods from. That makes us subservient to other nations, such as the Saudis, for example, is a good present day example of this. And it's a bad influence for the nation as a whole. Just think of what the Saudis are able to do. They are to sort of produce schemes in this nation to convert people to radical Islam with their sort of conversion schemes that they do. So I'd say that, and the corporatist aspect is to prevent businesses in the nation, especially big businesses, for acting against the interests of the country via state limitations and state ownership to a degree of businesses. So that means the nation as a whole will act for one goal, not be pulled apart in directions by the numerous different goals of different big businesses, and be rendered ineffective like a spider dangling from a single thread from a ceiling. And this is the only way that we can deal with the challenges which come to us in the modern age.
Yeah, I'd say I'd probably broadly agree. The only issue I'd probably have with autarky is more just like I think of the example of French cheese, right? The French can make really nice brie and camembert at a much cheaper price because of their government subsidies than we can. So English camemberts are quid, and French camembert 60p, and it's much nicer. So, but my only concern is, why would I prevent like the citizens of Britain from being able to get, obviously cheese isn't the most dramatic example, but why would I prevent them from being able to get good cheese, like really like at the cost to the French taxpayer, because obviously they're getting French subsidies? That'd be a question I'd have.
Well, because it makes us reliant on the French for that particular good, and that makes us at a disadvantage when it comes to trade, which means we are at the mercy in some aspects of trade to the French government, which shouldn't be. We should be completely sovereign.
Okay,
But
yeah, I can see that point. But it's more from a context of I think there should be measures in place to ensure that we can, you know, in times of crisis, be able to feed the population. You know, it's the number one, you know, requirement of the state to provide security to the citizens, right? That's the number one priority. But when it comes to, you could argue, I'd say camembert is a luxury good, really. Like, you don't need camembert to survive. So
Still, people would be upset if because we were reliant on the French camembert supply, they would no longer get that cheese. That would be a major inconvenience for certain people, for the catering industry. So that would put us at a disadvantage. It does put us at a disadvantage with trade.
Well, we produce English camembert at the moment. It's just people don't buy it. So I mean,
Now,
we are
hold on a
capable of
second, 'cause
producing.
And by banning the French imports of camembert, we would sort of increase traffic for English businesses, British businesses, and the manufacture of camembert. Put British businesses first, and reduce reliance on foreign powers. So it's a
on
win-win
paper,
situation.
or you could just bankrupt British camembert, because
Possibly,
suddenly people don't always act out of taste. They sometimes act out of convenience.
Indeed. The only point I'd make in response is that basically you're not taking advantage of French taxpayers. Like, if French taxpayers are giving, you know, or are happy to pay for, you know, French camembert to be cheaper, then why would we just not take advantage of that? I think you're, you know, perhaps missing out on, you know, some kind of luxury good. I don't know. But...
I mean, it may be all well and good from the terms of convenience, but say if in the future there is a war with France, I'm not saying it's likely, but it's a prospect that we can go to war with any country at a moment's notice. And I mean, that will put us at a major, we'd have a shortage of this popular cheese in the terms of war.
Okay.
And I mean, we would be that. Just think if it was an essential good, like potatoes from Belarus or from Poland or something, they would have a major food shortage and possibly starvation if we went to a war with a nation but sanctioned us, which we obtained large amounts of our food from. I mean, it's just a very dangerous situation to be to be reliant on foreign goods for any particular thing.
Okay, I can understand that perspective. Perhaps it comes from perhaps our difference of perspectives comes from a different view on where civilization is at. I think perhaps that's
right,
maybe
because
that's
we're in an
maybe a fair
international
statement.
system, and any advantage we don't take, another nation takes for us.
Yeah, pretty much. That's
how
my
the
view,
international
but...
community works. You miss out on an opportunity, someone else dives in and grabs it for you.
And another thing I'd say on the autarky point, China, if you obviously China's being quite a big success, even though its growth is slowing down a little. It's had a lot of success in terms of moving from a tertiary and primary based industry economy towards a service economy. Their power, their increase in power has come from as they've moved into that service economy, and I think you know, it's not perhaps realistic to, you know, get people to dig coal out the ground at a loss. I don't think that's fair on the rest of the citizenry of the country, because it means that they're basically having to pay money for something that you know, we can get from elsewhere. But, yeah.
I mean, it might not be fair, but it's what's needed. I mean, if we are to persevere as a nation and sort of not conquer, but sort of survive, if you will, then we can't be dependent on foreign nations for anything. We have to.
So we just need to plod along.
Well,
because survival
exactly.
goes against what you said earlier. Though you implied that we're going down a path at the moment which, without intervention, would lead us to absolute rack and ruin, and yet your only outcome from what you just said is to merely survive as a nation. We shouldn't seek to thrive under your autocratic proposals. That's the impression I got. Feel free to correct me.
Well, so I have to go and do something for a second. Then I'll be back in a few minutes. If that's all right.
I'll,
Just
No worries.
I'll add the man himself now. It's
Hello,
Ozzy.
hello, hello.
Yeah.
Dear boys.
I'm actually going to go grab a
yes.
cigarette, but it's good to have you on board, Ozzy. I will be right back.
All right, cheerio, mate.
Lovely.
Anything to say, Aussie?
Anything to say?
As an you do economics, don't you? I didn't.
Yeah, at last my degree comes to use for right-wing spurgery purposes.
Yeah, lovely.
I did a bit of reading actually because Limbo, of course, is a distributist, and I now have a bit of more of an understanding than I did of the system. One of my big problems when people talk about the economy in particular is that people seem to view it as one, distinct from everything else, and two, they sort of view it as sort of like as a sort of like as something that you just cast, and that like you have to shape it into a certain thing. I would prefer to see the economy more as a tool and a dynamic tool. But actually, one of the most important things I actually wanted to bring up, because this is a right-wing stream about economics, is I actually wanted to say something that might be quite spicy for some people, but I think that there is a very good case in the right wing to worry about inequality, and the reason for that is that within a right-wing economy, is that within any economy, if you have too much inequality, people get very, very pissed off, and it's a well-known thing that increases inequality predicts crime even more than ethnic diversity does. So that's one statistic you can bring yourself to, and it's just I see a lot of people who are just like, well, I'm happy for people to be richer than me. And one of the things I've been thinking recently is that I don't think humans naturally have a problem with other people being richer than them. But I think there's like an incumbent thing, like when someone is more powerful than you, you expect them to face bigger consequences when something goes wrong. And you see this in chimpanzees actually. If something goes wrong with the troop, the alpha male almost always dies. I'm not saying we should kill the 1%, because I mean that's directly against my own self-interests.
I think that would be extraordinarily based.
I personally say that if a healthy right-wing ecology has a perspective on rich and powerful people, which sees them as there by, they are chosen there as a matter of respect, and that when they abuse it and when they try to use their economic power to try and guide society in a way that is not afforded to them, that we should be a bit more cautious. And I noticed that some people want to respond. So
yeah, I think we didn't let Nabster answer last time. So sorry, Nabster.
Wait, if I could
Ozzy
say
said-
something quick about Ozzy's. I'll let you speak after Napster, but I would generally agree with Ozzy's thing, especially if I'm talking on a Catholic social teaching perspective. I mean, on inequality. I mean, it's how we frame it and how we perceive the argument in an economical sense. Because, for example, in conventional politics, we have these liberals, progressives, the left, defending the rights and inequalities of many minorities, but they tend to defend rights which are not rights. For example, as abortion, same-sex marriage. It's how we perceive it and frame it. So yeah, I'll let Napster speak now.
So Ozzy was speaking about how the winners, let's say, of society, or the rich, don't get punished when bad things happen. This is not actually a part of free market economics. This is crony capitalism, where the government colludes with big business for their own greedy interests. And in a pure free market economy would actually be fair because no one is getting any advantages from the government. And another thing I would like to say that inequality is actually natural because human beings don't have the same capabilities as each other. Like, this is not based on race, but some, like, two people, they are not gonna have the same competence. So the inequality will be natural. So I have 2 points.
No, it's natural, I would say, but I think especially as someone person of faith, is it our moral duty when we see, let's say, a veteran on the street who's probably been fucked by the government? I think it's our moral duty to at least do something.
Okay. So I suppose.
Oh, his mic's
Oh,
gone.
was he?
Ripperino.
We lost you, bro, Ozzy.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead,
there are two elements to this objection. So the first,
Bruh.
He's gonna get.
Oh dear. Yeah.
I think he was going a bit robot mode earlier, but
Yeah.
Be
That's
big expensive things.
don't worry, we'll get the rest of the sentence in about 5 minutes. It'd be like,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Epic economics, right?
Yeah,
Well,
so
I've literally forgotten where we were now.
hello, am I here?
There we go. Yeah,
Oh,
you
you're
dropped
here
out for a
now.
second. Dropped out
Two
for a
elements to
second.
the objection you started off, and then we lost
Two
you.
elements.
Oh
Yeah.
no, I'll be back in a sec. All right.
Oh, poor lad.
So might I say something?
Oh yeah,
Yes,
you can
I
say
can.
it, absolutely, yeah.
So there is actually a difference between equality and we can say a safety net, which is that equality, everyone has to be the same, but in a safety net, we make sure that everyone is at a decent level. So this is a big difference.
I suppose there's kind of the, if you want to go back to the sort of sort of liberal view, I suppose there's three views, isn't there? There's the state should do nothing. There's the night watchman state. And then you sort of have like more William Beveridge kind of social safety net kind of idea. I'm probably more sympathetic with the third. I think there should be some level of, I think as a society, you are to an extent judged on how, like, the worst citizens in your society, how their quality of life looks. You are to an extent judged on that as a civilization. Obviously, the Victorians made massive advancements in terms of, infrastructure, technology, health, human standards of living, but it's still judged on chimney sweeps. It's still judged on, to an extent, slavery. I think you are judged on the worst, sort of bottom of the ladder people. So I think that there's a level of living under which, in a society, that we should be willing to accept people can live under. But Ozzy's back, and I think he probably wanted to make a more antiquated statement than I've just made. So.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Antiquated, dear boy. Oh my goodness. I'm just actually going to reorient myself so my wife is a bit more conducive to such a illustrious as this. But to carry on in my due part, I will want to respond to Navs in due time. But until then,
Righto. Has anyone else got anything to say?
Yeah.
Well, I think the nature of free market economics is part of a kind of what's known as a liberal ontology. It's the relationship between things, and it's always a case of it's always a case of liberation in my eyes. We are liberated from the tyranny of the crony corporate types by the hyper-competitive liberal business. We are immune to tyranny because of that. In the other camp, well, I know we're supposed to be talking about the right here, but you've got the contemporary left who are doing the same. We are liberated by our inherent racial bias via, whatever programs they happen to cook up. In terms of the state, let's take even free market economics caters to that. In the liberal free market, you do not gain from refusing customers based on ethnic or racial background grounds. you'll be outcompeted. So that's essentially that is essentially the ethos behind many of the problems we're facing, because as I said earlier, the free market does not seek to preserve anything. Any good which is more competitive than any other good, be it on the lines of it's able to be produced at a cheaper rate or at a higher quality, is better. So if it's not the authentic, then it doesn't matter. It still sells more. So we're back to the point of what are we conserving if we go down the free market route? That's the main problem I always have with free market types.
How do I sound, by the way, chaps?
Oh, you sound alright now.
Very good. Very
Better
good.
now.
Thing.
Yeah.
Right,
You go
very
back to
good.
Napster now.
Okay, so Napster raised two issues, and the first issue was the issue of, well, it's that's not capitalism, and there's a couple of problems with this. The first thing is that I don't view an economy as some sort of, I don't view it as an ideological abstraction. I actually think it's actually I think this is actually kind of a dated thing that we do. I think both on the right and left, we seem to view the economy as, we like to put it into boxes. And we also try and view it separate from everything else, when in reality, the economy, it's just kind of the study of the workday, I guess, is the best way you can describe it. And that's really sounds like you were robotic, right?
No, carry on.
Oh,
You're making a good point, but basically what you're saying is economics up to this point is quite Newtonian, is what you're trying to say.
I guess. I mean, I don't like these NRX terms, because it's like,
well, Newtonian isn't an NRX term, but I mean,
I know, but it's like, bro, you're not viewing it as like, mate, have you seen my data? But for me, it's I just view the economy as something that, like, does it work? So the next issue then is that inequality is natural, and this is true actually. Inequality has arisen throughout human history. Even in your DNA, you have 2 female ancestors per male ancestor. Some people don't like that fact, but it's true. And inequality is a natural state of things, and I do not dispute this. However, too higher inequality will inevitably become a structural problem. So one of the best things I can point you to is some of the work. It's some of the work done by sociologists, and I can't remember his name, by Putnam. He did some work actually, aside from his Pluribus Unum, diversity in crime. He also did one about inequality in crime. And inequality, like, it's got some very, very damaging effects. And there is also a really good book by Charles Murray, that is the Charles Murray, the bell curve Charles Murray, called Coming Apart, in which he basically describes how inequality basically ruins communities. And like, so I don't think anyone disputes that a doctor should earn more than a trash can collector. But the question is that, can you really justify sort of things like Brazilian levels? Like Brazilian levels of someone lives in a huge mansion and like they don't give any money to the guy living in the shack next to them. And like, I really struggle to see the point of view in which that could be justified, and also is sociologically stable. But that's me.
So can I speak? So yes, I do agree that inequality. I don't think inequality necessarily itself is bad, but its consequences are in fact quite poisonous. So, and another point, yes, in a free market society, even even the poor have been shown to have their life improved. So, in my opinion, I would rather take a few very rich people and everyone decent instead of everyone poor.
So there is actually something to be said about, does the free market cause prosperity? This is where I can get into really, really dangerous territory. But because we're on a relatively far out stream, I think I'm going to risk it. If you make certain controls, like psychometric and biological controls, the free how liberal a country is affecting its wealth basically disappears as an explanatory factor. And when I refer to biology, I mean how a country is on aggregate, intelligence-wise, personality-wise, trust-wise, all these sort of things. I really caution this modelistic view of the economy, because what an economy really is actually just a relational device between people. And if you understand as far as you know, Germany was rich under a totalitarian regime, and it also became equally rich after recovering from the war. And that is because what really matters is the people within the ecology or the economic system, because people make stuff, and they don't stop making stuff once. Like, for example, the Laffer curve for most countries is now estimated to be 75% of tax income, according to a paper that was published. And for those who don't know, the Laffer curve is basically this idea that if you increase taxes too much, revenue will fall. That's true, but the percentage at which that is not something like 30% of your income or 50% of your income. It's somewhere around 75 to 80% of your income. So, and I'm not suggesting that we tax 80% of someone's income. I think that's absurd. But I think you also need to understand that most people work, and the sum of the economy is actually the sum of the people and not of the laws it has. Anyway,
it's totally true. What I can't remember what it's called. I think Lapster curve. I'm sorry, I know Limby wants to end a minute. I'll just do one more point. I think that's not been proved scientifically, but Ozzy's correct. I think I made the point earlier that there's no such thing as a community decision, only a community agreeing on an individual decision. It's important to remember that the economy is not a sort of like androgynous being, perhaps, or it's not independent minded on its own. It is made up of people. It's not necessarily, when you're studying economics, you're not really studying a science. You're studying the actions of people, which I suppose you could say is psychology. But my view generally is that it's a bit like the stock market. Like, the stock market just sort of goes up vaguely. We don't know why it goes up. It just does. I think it's the same thing with the economy. As long as there's humans in the economy making, profit or advancement, then the things are going to be fine. I think with perhaps you might disagree, but I think with economics, as long as you don't do anything like massively stupid, I think it's largely a rhetoric game, to be honest. But maybe that's not a popular view with economists. But anyway, that's all I'll say for this stream, I think, because we're ending at 125, aren't we? So, but
yeah.
Okay,
let's give some.
Napster wants to respond. But Napster wants to respond.
Okay, Napster.
So,
right. All right.
you said that you said that the people of the country are the ones behind its success. But I would give some counter examples where a change of, say, laws or policy increased the output, let's say. So, like we see in China, when they adopted the free market, they went from basically nothing to the richest country. We look at, say, Chile went from nothing to the poorest country in Latin America. So I actually think the circumstances are more important than the actual people.
Okay, so Perhaps I should clarify what I mean by an economic structure. So, like, yes, of course, there's an obvious point at which you destroy the human incentive to action, at which point, so for example, if someone comes up to you and says, I'm taking your house and you're still going to work, well, you're not going to work. And it's a well-known fact that, for example, slaves are less productive than free men. I don't deny that. However, if you want to take a more I think the view should possibly be taken with a bit more nuance. And so, for example, the classic one would be the range between the wealth in Sweden and the wealth in Switzerland, which are perhaps on the two edges of the spectrum with regard to European economic freedom. Their per capita income is not very different from each other. And the overall perception that I get as a general rule, so there are always going to be fluke cases, and normally economic policies will, for short periods of time, have what a statistician would call a non-stationary effect. But one of the things you can expect is that over time, these will just basically be looked at like shocks. And one of the things that you, and that's why I generally rely on things where you can, so the typical report that people use to measure how free a market is comes from the Fraser Institute in Canada, which is the Global Economic Freedom Report, which is published every year. And if you can, basically what you can do is there is this technique called regression, which you can basically take those numbers and you can compare them in performance to something else like national average IQ or literacy rates, or pick your garden variety fruit and whatever it is. And almost always you can explain away economic freedom by using one of these coefficients instead. So I've always got this very skeptical perspective on when people say it's like big structural changes, like from going from Tsarist Russia to the Soviet Union, will completely disrupt the productive interests of the people. However, minor changes don't really seem to do that, and like the difference between, say, Switzerland and Sweden is almost insignificant from a statistical perspective. Anyway, I ramble.
Well, I think Limbu's hopped off. I think he has to get up at 5 tomorrow. But Lewis is here. So,
Wait, is he the one manning the StreamYard?
No, there's no one manning it now. He's just gone.
24-hour stream until Limbu gets home. Let's go.
Gentlemen, welcome to the Ancapistan stream economy.
There's literally less people watching than there are.
Oh my god. We are in trouble now.
Guys, we're going to make so much money.
There's literally less people watching than there are people on the panel. Right, Lewis.
Sorry. 24-hour stream. Advertisement.
Welcome, Louis.
Limbu's still here, actually.
I made Ancapistan in nation states, so.
Right,
Lewis,
question?
Sorry, I was just going to say, you've just hopped on. Do you have anything particular you want to say about the last? And anything comes to mind off the top of your head? But
Anything comes to mind, just specifically regarding the free markets. It's I put a questions in there. It's all well and good discussing what you perceive as being better on either utilitarian grounds, that being usually around efficiency, what's more efficient, and then trying to apply a moral basis for it. I think really a better way to go about it is to actually look at where these economic systems come from, which requires you to not engage in, and I'm not saying that you are knowingly doing so, it's more so I think that it's is Dave hopped off? Dave's hopped off. I think it's more so. Oh well, I think it's more important to look at, like I said, where those systems come from, their groundings, the grounding they have in regards to philosophy, ideas, so that would be ideology, and then it also requires you to look at the people as well and where they were at the time of their writing. I think that's also very important, because otherwise you're engaging without realizing it in deconstructionism. So you're only so all you're doing is looking at the text. You're not actually looking at who's written it. So it's of no actual value in the end, because you're just arguing about words at that point.
Ah, yes, arguing with Lewis about words.
I was just thinking the same thing, mate.
Hardcore entertainment.
I don't know. Sorry, Ozzy wants to say something. I don't know anything about economics. I should probably shut up.
I mean, I'm 2 years through a 3-year degree in economics, and I don't really know much about economics. But what I would put forward is that, like, one of a traditional conservative perspective on economics is they don't care, and like, worrying about the economy seems to be a very new thing. It seems to be, dare I say, an Enlightenment value. British for its part, but an Enlightenment value as well. You have, like, in the ancient or traditional ecology, you could call it either one. There is more a concern of partaking. This idea that everyone contributes and everyone takes back out, and that's why when bad things happen, like a famine, it wasn't necessarily anyone's fault. It was more seen as, well, God doesn't like us. We've done something particularly wrong. And then you strive towards forgiveness and betterness. However, these days, because it's so materialistic, when something goes wrong, we are much more likely to blame. And, we look to our new overlords as Bezos and things like that. But, sorry, that was just a tangential remark to what Lewis was packing off on. Anyway.
It's all right. So just as a further question, does anyone know which one came first, barter or currency?
Probably barter, I'd say.
Yeah, barter definitely came
first. That's the answer most people give, isn't it, Lewis?
That's the answer. Yeah, it is. Most people give the answer that barter comes first. That is the idea from Adam Smith, and it's not true. Barter doesn't come first, because the barter system, in the way that it's laid out, is where you have 3 people. One man, say he produces arrows. One man has fish. Another one has cows. The guy who has the fish doesn't want arrows. He wants cattle.
Double problem at once. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So the guy with the arrows sells his arrows to the guy who wants them, which is the guy with the cattle. He exchanges that. He now has cattle, and he exchanges the cattle for the fish. So, right, that system of barter has never been recorded to ever have happened at any one point in human history. Ever.
Being never recorded doesn't mean that it never happened. I mean, written language and written records have only been a thing for the past few thousand years. I mean, in prehistoric,
we have got,
before,
however, pre-contact hunter-gatherer societies to look at for examples, and we have tons of archaeological evidence.
Yeah. So when you're looking at the archaeological evidence, you can go back about 5,000 years. Specifically, because that's round about where you start seeing people trading, but they don't trade in things that are they don't do it via barter. They don't just walk up to each other and do a sort of ritual and then go, oh, we'll exchange our things. There has to be like a common set thing that you can exchange for something else, right? So there has to be a central currency. So for example, something libertarians I know mention a lot is the gold standard.
Yes.
Right. They harp on about the gold standard being very important, but that as an idea doesn't come out of a barter system. Barter is a form of you have haggling as a form of barter, right? But to engage in bartering, you have to have currency to do that with. Now, the currency may be set by a king, as it was in ancient Sumeria, and they have written tablets, stone tablets, carvings for their writing, and that's you can translate into Sumerian via Greek, ancient Greek. This is actually what Keynes did, right?
Oh,
He's
hell
now
yeah.
right now Keynes himself, yeah, he's completely wrong in regards to
Thank you,
economics.
man.
He's completely wrong. He's applying a
Thank you.
liberal. He's applying a liberal
No,
view in regards to how economics works, in that it is Newtonian, right? It has an end point. It's linear. It starts and stops, and he's using models within that liberal framework of a start point and an end point to try and get this to try and apply. Sorry, to apply these models to economics, and
might I
economics is not a simple thing that can be reduced down to basic
Might I
components of
ask,
supply and demand, for example.
are you guys Austrian economists? You believe in the Austrian school?
No,
I
I
Vaguely,
was
don't. To be
I
honest,
educated
do.
in it,
I
but
don't.
it's somewhat.
You reject what you reject these.
I reject classical liberal economics. I reject Austrian economics, and I reject Keynesian economics. I basically reject economics as an idea completely, because it's too complex for you to apply models. You can't apply a model to economics
Yes,
because
but
it's too complex.
Austrians don't apply models.
I mean,
That's
personally,
okay.
I'd
They
argue
use
that economics as a whole is a non-existent factor. Economics as a whole is a bourgeois menace to the traditional ways of society that have been established. I mean, it's been, modern common concepts of economics have simply been invented by certain classes in society in the world to disrupt society and reduce it down to aspects which aren't unitarian, which can be controlled easily, in my opinion at least.
In a material sense, I
mean-
wouldn't completely disagree.
might
But
I finish my point on Austrian economics?
yeah, go on.
So Austrian economics uses a priori knowledge instead of like empirical knowledge. Like they use reason or logic. Yeah, praxeology. A priori knowledge, that's the important word to understand economics.
I mean,
I understand that that's what libertarians use, but they're also wrong, because the basis of they're also wrong, whether it's a priori or not. The economics as a system is too complex to use a priori arguments, therefore reason, to explain how it works. It's too complicated to explain. And the irony with it is that they're working off of a basis regarding Adam Smith, and there's another gentleman, don't remember.
Ricardo.
No, it's Industrial Revolution. That's the time period I'm thinking about in the UK. Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill.
Oh,
It's those two specifically, right? Their idea comes out of. This is why I mentioned you can't use the deconstructionist worldview when you can't just look at the text. You have to understand that those gentlemen were talking about economics and explaining how their society was changing and how it worked via economics at the time that they were having a massive industrial revolution, which was completely changing. It was moving away from the old way of how economics was formed, and effectively the church was the bank. And the entire reason, right, because they were literate, but they could also read, right? And the first place that you find currency coming from, the first place that currency is used, right, a centralized currency, was in Sumeria. And the entire point of currency was as a form of bureaucracy to be able to measure what the state had and what it didn't have in regards to resources. That was it. And they used gold, silver, and bronze because they attached those metals to God, or to their gods at the time, right? So they had a religious significance. And because of that, they would stamp the coins with the face of their lord, their king, because the king had divine right from the gods. Therefore, the currency was divine in a way, and when you paid taxes, you didn't need to pay it in gold
But it was
if
quite
you were in
literally
debt.
sovereign, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Just to
quite
round
literally,
that off.
yes. Well, if you look at, for example, pounds, and the currency that we use, it comes from this system, this ancient system. All the way back, it comes from that. So effectively, when you paid your taxes, you didn't have to pay it in gold or silver or bronze coins. You didn't need to do that, right? You didn't need to do that. You could pay it in whatever you were able to produce. So if you were a farmer and you produce wheat, you could pay your taxes in wheat. It's just that you would have to pay the equivalent of whatever you were in debt to. And say you were one gold coin of whatever it was, right, with the stamp on the face of it, a mark, a symbol of the king. It was one gold coin. That one gold coin, say you owed a debt of a gold coin and
The gold
two
coin's
silver
worth,
ones.
yeah.
And a gold coin is worth 5 silver coins. Technically, you're in debt of 7 silver coins, and 2 bushels of wheat that you produce is worth 1 silver coin. So that's 2 times 7. That's 17. That's 14. Sorry. So that means that you can pay your 1 gold coin and 2 silver coins in 14 bushels of wheat, and then your debt's paid. Done.
So
I mean-
essentially, to cut it, I think if I've got anything wrong, correct me. But the too long didn't read on that is that the Victorians were getting used to understanding the value of commodities via money, but they were able to barter at the time
Yes,
because
they
they
had
could do
currency.
so. And
Yeah,
from there, liberal thinkers were essentially projecting when they were trying to understand the world and how societies and human beings evolved. They
Yeah.
were projecting their own perspective back
onto the past.
onto the people that they were trying to explore intellectually.
Yeah, thereby revising history. So it's a form of revisionism by accident. But as a result of that, it's completely, if I may say so, fucked up the actual view of the past irrevocably.
Yeah. I'm going to pop off in a second, but before I skewer off, I was just wanted to basically convey my thoughts on this idea of Austrian economics versus Keynesian economics versus. I think it's rather simplistic. You're basically trying to put not simply the economy but the way humans behave in a nice little box, and it's unfortunately it's not that it's more complicated. I guess it's that it doesn't abstract down like that. And I personally I have a habit of basically saying, can I predict something? And the more I can predict it, the better. And so in a sense, if you basically view economics, and this is the controversial bit, and perhaps it's cowardice of me to say this and then leave, but the part of economics that's made the best predictions is been the mathematical section. And that's the reason why we generally use it more. However, that doesn't necessarily mean we should aim with what mathematical economics tries to predict, which is more GDP. I think we should probably be trying to aim for something more like sustainability, good ecology, and a happy community, and not essentially trying to flip the board every 10 years, which is what capitalism tries to do. But anyway, that's me, and you can rip me apart in my absence. Bye.
It's all right. I won't do that.
Oh, I think I
Yeah,
might
but I
end the
will.
stream here.
Okay.
Any closing
Okay.
remarks from the panel? I'll start vote.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
If no one else wants to start, I'll
Alright.
just go ahead. So I mentioned liberation earlier because liberation is essentially the enemy of the right. Everything I think, particularly Big Dave here has talked about, we've seen through this concept of liberation, be it liberation through markets of tyranny or liberation via the left of racism, sexism, homophobia, and you name it. It has ended faith, family, and folk through undermining them. Because the more you can atomize people into groups that have nothing to do with those three things, the more you can eventually create a society of wonderful atomized individuals. And all it does is increase the influence of the state and the influence of the idea of liberation unto itself. And the final thing I'll say, the very final thing I'll say, is that when it comes to what the right needs to understand, it's increasingly less an economic question and even less of a demographic question. It is a question of power and how you understand power.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Very good
Yeah.
point. I don't have anything as profound to say. I just say sub to Big Man Limbo. Need to get him up to 200. Very good stream actually.
Also, sub to
Oh, yeah,
myself
absolutely.
for
Oh yeah, I
top-notch
think
rugby commentary.
I've put it down all
Rugby
on the
commentary.
streams.
Sub
Sub to
to-
Napster, you know. Sub to
yeah.
even though
Yes,
he's got
Shout out to
mistakes.
shout out to Navster for coming on, getting absolutely dogpiled by all the
Yeah.
big man.
Or
No.
Bully the Brown Man.
This was
Yeah.
interesting. So I will get interesting enough.
No, thanks for coming.
Pretty base
Yeah.
stream. Although
Yeah,
I
before we
don't-
close off, can I just say we must all bow down to the unstoppable tide of Islam. Inshallah, goodbye.
Yes.
Inshallah, Habibis, my friends.
Embrace Allah.
All right.
And
On
prostrate ourselves on the altar of French camembert.
Oh,
Tasty.
yes, very well.
Oh, French.
Yes. I think okay. Let us conclude the stream. All right.
Very
It
base,
was
very
great. This
enjoyable.
stream. You know? Yeah. So
Yeah.
in a bit, lads. In a bit.
God bless. God